The merchant's stall smelled like old leather and desperation, which meant Kazuma was probably about to make a terrible decision. He stood in the cramped Axel marketplace, squinting at a tarnished goblet that looked like someone had fished it from a dragon's digestive tract. Transportation artifact. The merchant said, his smile showing too many teeth. Very rare. Very powerful. Touch it and whoosh, instant travel to places of great wealth. Kazuma picked up the goblet, turning it over in his hands. Strange symbols crawled along the rim, faintly glowing in the afternoon light. The metal felt warm, almost alive. His luck stat was tingling, which could mean either fortune or disaster. With his party, it was usually both. How much for you, special price? 12,000 Ares. Kazuma set the goblet down. I'll give you 3,000. 11,000. Final offer. 4,000, and I won't report you to the Adventurers Guild for selling unlicensed magical items. Harshuma, the merchant's smile faltered. You drive a hard bargain. 8,000? 5,000 cash right now. They settled on 6,000 Ares, which meant Kazuma had overpaid by at least 4,000. He pocketed the goblet just as a familiar voice shrieked across the marketplace. Kazuma, you bought something without consulting me first. Aqua materialized beside him, her blue hair catching the sunlight like a warning beacon. Let me see that. I'm sensing dark energy. Definitely cursed. Probably haunted. We should purify it immediately. It's not cursed, it's a travel artifact. Kazuma held the goblet away from her reaching hands. We're going to use it to reach somewhere profitable. Somewhere we can actually complete a high-paying quest for once. Let me perform a proper purification ritual. No. But as a goddess, you're not purifying my investment. A small explosion of red smoke announced Megumin's arrival. She adjusted her pointed hat and peered at the goblet with her crimson eyes. What manner of mystical relic have you acquired, Kazuma? Does it possess destructive capabilities? Can it channel explosive energy? It's transportation magic. No explosions. Megumin's shoulders slumped. How disappointing. Though I suppose even mundane translocation could serve as a proper entrance for my ultimate spell. Imagine I arrive at a new location, assess the surroundings, and then unleash explosion upon the most suitable target. We're not exploding anything the moment we arrive somewhere new. You never let me have any fun. Darkness jogged up to join them, her armor clanking with each step. Did I hear something about danger, cursed artifacts, potential magical backlash that could harm the wielder? Her voice carried an edge of excitement that made Kazuma immediately regretful about his entire life. It's just a travel goblet. Simple, safe, profitable. Oh. Darkness deflated slightly, then brightened. But what if it malfunctions? What if it tears us apart during transit? What if we arrive in the middle of a hostile location where I'd have to shield everyone from incoming attacks? Kazuma pinched the bridge of his nose. This was his party. This was his life. A goddess who made everything worse, a wizard who could only cast one spell per day, and a crusader who treated pain like a reward. And yet somehow, they'd survived this long. Look, he said, holding up the goblet. The merchant said it goes to wealthy places. We touch it, we arrive somewhere rich. We complete one good quest, we come back with actual money. Simple plan, no complications. Aqua crossed her arms. I'm telling you, it feels wrong. My divine senses are never incorrect about these things. Your divine senses said the cabbage quest was safe. That was different. The cabbages were possessed by a vengeful spirit, which I correctly identified. After we'd already signed the contract. Megumin tapped her staff against the ground. I propose we test this device immediately. The sooner we arrive at our destination, the sooner I can scout for optimal detonation zones. You're not detonating anything. You say that now, but you always change your mind when the situation requires my expertise. Darkness stepped closer, examining the goblet with unsettling interest. If we're truly going to use this artifact, I should hold it first. That way, if something goes wrong during the transfer, I'll absorb the initial damage and protect everyone else. Why are you like this? Kazuma muttered. Like what? Nothing. Forget it. He looked at the goblet, then at his party. The smart move would be to sell the thing and forget about it. The smarter move would be to find normal safe work that didn't involve magical artifacts of questionable origin. But rent was due in 3 days, and they had exactly 400 iris between them. Everyone touches the goblet on 3, Kazuma said. And Aqua, so help me if you try to purify it mid-transport. I make no promises. Megumin, no explosions at the destination. Your lack of faith in my restraint is hurtful. Darkness, just try to act normal when we arrive. I shall do my best to maintain proper decorum in the face of whatever dangers await us. Kazuma sighed. This was going to be a disaster. He could feel it in his bones, in his luck stat, in every survival instinct he'd honed since being dropped into this ridiculous world. But they were out of options, and the goblet was already paid for. All right, everyone ready? 3 hands joined his on the warm metal surface. The symbols flared bright gold, and Kazuma had exactly 1 second to think about how much he regretted every decision that had led to this moment. The marketplace vanished in a flash of light, and a sensation like being yanked through space by an angry deity. Kazuma's last coherent thought before the world dissolved was that he'd definitely forgotten to ask about return travel. The merchant's stall was gone. So was Axel. So was any chance of getting a refund. The world snapped back into focus with all the grace of a drunken teleport spell. Kazuma hit wet grass hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs, tasting mud and regret in equal measure. Rain drizzled from a gray sky that looked like it had never seen sunshine and didn't particularly want to start now. He pushed himself up on shaking arms. Everyone alive. Barely. Aqua groaned from somewhere to his left. That was the worst transportation magic I've ever experienced. My divine essence feels violated. I think I left part of my stomach in another dimension. Megumin sat up slowly, her hat askew. The sensation of dimensional transit was most unpleasant. However, I notice we have successfully arrived at our destination, which appears to be... She trailed off, her red eyes widening. A castle. Kazuma followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop for the 2nd time in as many minutes. The structure loomed against the stormy sky like something out of a fairy tale written by someone who hated happiness. Towers stretched upward at impossible angles. Turrets sprouted from walls like stone mushrooms. The whole building seemed to shift and settle as he watched, as if it couldn't quite decide on its final form. Rain streaked down ancient stones, and somewhere in the distance he heard what might have been a bell, or possibly a very large, very angry bird. That's not Arkan Letia, Kazuma said. Nor Elroad, Megumin added. Definitely not the capital, Aqua said. I've been to the capital. It doesn't look nearly this ominous. Darkness climbed to her feet, water dripping from her armor. How magnificent, a fortress of unknown origin, shrouded in mystery, potentially filled with dangerous enchantments and hostile guardians. This is already exceeding my expectations. That's not a good thing, Kazuma said. but he was talking to himself because alarms had started ringing. The sound came from the castle, sharp, urgent bells that cut through the rain. Lights flickered in windows. Kazuma's danger sense, honed by months of barely surviving his own party's antics, started screaming at him to run. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to run to. They were standing on a manicured lawn that stretched toward the castle like a welcome mat, designed by someone who didn't actually welcome visitors. "We should leave," Kazuma said. "Right now." Everyone touched the goblet again. He pulled the artifact from his pouch. The symbols that had glowed so brightly in Axel were now dark and cold. He tapped it, shook it, pressed it against his forehead, and concentrated really hard on being literally anywhere else. Nothing happened. "It's not working." "Of course it's not working," Aqua said. "I told you it was cursed." "But does anyone listen to the goddess Nomen? Everyone just assumes I'm being dramatic." "You are being dramatic. That doesn't mean I'm wrong." Figures appeared in the distance, moving toward them with purpose. They wore long, dark robes that billowed in the wind, and several were holding what looked like sticks, but probably weren't sticks, because nothing in Kazuma's life was ever that simple anymore. "Megumin," Kazuma said carefully. "Please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." The wizard's staff was already raised. They approach with weapons drawn. Clearly, they intend hostility. I should establish dominance by demonstrating my supreme magical prowess before they can. No explosions. But Kazuma, we just arrived. We don't even know where we are. You can't just blow up the first thing you see. I absolutely can. That's my specialty. Kazuma grabbed her staff and pushed it down. We're surrounded, outmatched, and have no idea what kind of magic these people are using. We're going to use diplomacy. Diplomacy is boring. Diplomacy keeps us alive. The robed figures were close enough now that Kazuma could make out details. They were definitely human, which was somewhat reassuring. They definitely had those stick things pointed at his party, which was significantly less reassuring. An older woman in emerald robes stepped forward in her expressions stern enough to curdle milk. "Identify yourselves immediately," she said, her voice carrying an accent Kazuma didn't recognize. "You are trespassing on Hogwarts grounds. Explain how you breached our protective enchantments." Kazuma raised his hand slowly, making sure everyone could see he wasn't reaching for a weapon. "This is a misunderstanding. We're travelers. We used a transportation artifact that malfunctioned. We didn't mean to intrude on your Hogwarts." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Transportation artifact, show it to me." Kazuma held out the goblet. The woman made a complicated gesture with her stick, and the goblet flew from his hand. It hung in the air between them, rotating slowly while she examined it. "A portkey," she said. "Unauthorized and clearly unstable. Where did you acquire this?" "I bought it from a merchant in Axel. He said it would take us somewhere wealthy. I'm starting to think he may have lied about the destination. And possibly about the return trip," Aqua added helpfully. The woman's expression shifted from stern to deeply concerned. "You activated an unknown port key without verifying its destination or return protocol. Do you have any idea how reckless that is?" "In my defense," Kazuma said, "I'm starting to realize that now." More robed figures arrived, forming a loose circle around the party. Kazuma counted at least a dozen, all with those Styx wands, probably, if this place worked on similar logic to his own world, trained on them. His hand drifted toward his sword, before his brain caught up, and reminded him that starting a fight right now would be impressively stupid, even by his standards. Aqua stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height. "I am aqua goddess of water, most beautiful and talented archpriest in all creation. I demand to speak with whoever is in charge of this establishment. Clearly, there has been a cosmic mistake that has brought us to your dreary castle, and I require immediate transportation back to... Archpriest? The woman's tone sharpened. You claim religious authority. I claim divine authority. I am literally a goddess. Several of the surrounding guards exchanged glances. One of them muttered something that sounded like another one. We'll need to verify your claims, the woman said, and determine whether you pose a threat to the school. School? Kazuma looked back at the castle. This is a school, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I am Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, and you are all coming with me for questioning. Darkness stepped forward with entirely too much enthusiasm. If questioning involves restraints or confinement in dark dungeons, I volunteer to go first. I understand the need for thorough interrogation, and I'm quite prepared to endure whatever methods you deem necessary to verify our intentions. Professor McGonagall stared at her. That won't be necessary. Are you certain I can withstand considerable discomfort? In fact, Kazuma clamped a hand over Darkness's mouth. She's just very cooperative. We all are. Very cooperative. No need for dungeons or restraints or whatever else you might be thinking. The professor studied them with the expression of someone reassessing every life choice that had led to this moment. Can any of you disapparate? Can we what? Apparate, teleport, vanish, and reappear elsewhere? Kazuma thought about his adventurer's skills. I can steal things and tie people up with magic rope. Does that count? No. Professor McGonagall waved her wand in a complex pattern. Anti-disapparition wards are already in place, but I'm adding additional bindings as a precaution. You won't be leaving the grounds until we've sorted this out. A faint shimmer passed over Kazuma's skin like invisible chains settling into place. He tried concentrating on his lurk skill, the one that sometimes let him slip away from notice. The magic resisted pushing back with gentle but absolute authority. Whatever these wards were, they weren't playing games. This way, McGonagall said. And I strongly suggest you cooperate. The castle has unpleasant ways of dealing with those who don't. Kazuma looked at his party. Aqua was muttering about disrespect to divine beings. Megumin was studying the castle with the expression of someone calculating blast radiuses. Darkness looked disturbingly excited about being escorted under guard. We're cooperating, Kazuma said quickly. Fully cooperating. Maximum cooperation. They were led toward the castle, rain soaking through their clothes, surrounded by wand-wielding strangers in a world that clearly operated on different rules. The goblet was confiscated. Their weapons were being eyed suspiciously. And Kazuma realized with the sinking certainty of someone who'd made too many bad decisions in too short a time that they were completely trapped. The merchant's smile flashed through his memory. Very rare, very powerful. Instant travel to places of great wealth. Well, the castle looked expensive. That was something. It wasn't much, but at this point, Kazuma would take what he could get. The room they were brought to was small, cold, and aggressively Scottish. Stone walls sweated moisture. A single narrow window let in watery gray light. The chairs were wooden and looked like they'd been designed by someone who believed comfort was a moral failing. Kazuma sat down carefully, testing whether the furniture would try to restrain him. It didn't, which was either a good sign or meant they had worse restraints waiting. Professor McGonagall stood by the door wand held with the casual readiness of someone who had definitely used it on uncooperative students before. Two other faculty members flanked her, a short man with a nervous twitch and a tall witch whose expression suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. "The Ministry has been notified," McGonagall said. "They'll want to question you about the port key and how you bypassed our security." "The what?" Kazuma asked. "The Ministry of Magic. They handle violations of magical law, including unauthorized international travel and breaches of protective enchantments." Kazuma's stomach sank. Ministry meant government. Government meant bureaucracy. Bureaucracy meant paperwork fees and probably jail time for infractions he didn't even know existed yet. "We didn't violate anything on purpose," he said. "The port key was supposed to take us somewhere profitable. Not here. No offense to your school." "None taken. Though I'm curious what made you think activating an unknown magical artifact was a sound decision." "Desperation and poor judgment, mostly." Aqua shifted in her chair. "I attempted to warn him. My divine senses detected malevolent energy emanating from the cursed goblet. But as usual, Kazuma ignored my wisdom in favor of reckless financial speculation." "You wanted to purify it," Kazuma said. "Purifying it would have destroyed its magic entirely." "Exactly. We wouldn't be trapped in this depressing castle if you'd listened to me." "We'd be broken, Axel, if I'd listened to you." McGonagall raised a hand. "That's enough. Until the Ministry arrives, you'll remain here under observation. I trust you won't attempt anything foolish." Megumin perked up. "Define foolish." "Any use of magic, any attempt to leave this room, any aggressive action towards staff or students." "What about defensive magic?" "That would fall under the category of foolish. Preemptive defensive magic." McGonagall's expression suggested she was reconsidering her career choices. "Especially that." The door opened before Megumin could propose additional categories. A woman entered, and Kazuma's danger sense immediately started screaming. She was short toad-like and wearing so much pink that it hurt to look at her. A bow perched in her gray curls like a malevolent butterfly. Her smile was the kind of smile that promised paperwork regulations and suffering delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. "Thank you, Minerva," the woman said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I'll handle matters from here." McGonagall stiffened. "Dolores, I wasn't aware you'd be responding personally." "Given the sensitive nature of this incident, the minister felt my oversight was necessary." She turned that smile on Kazuma and his party. "I am Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic and High Inquisitor of Hogwarts. Educational Decree Number 23 grants me authority over all disciplinary matters involving potential threats to school security." Kazuma knew that tone. He'd heard it from every petty official who'd ever tried to fine him for property damage after stopping a world-threatening crisis. It was the voice of someone who cared more about rules than results, who saw people as problems to be filed away properly. He stood and bowed slightly. "Kazuma Satu. These are my companions, Aqua, Megumin, and Darkness. We're adventurers who accidentally triggered a malfunctioning port key. We're happy to cooperate with any investigation and accept transportation back to our point of origin as soon as possible." Umbridge's smile widened without reaching her eyes. "How wonderfully cooperative. Though I'm afraid matters aren't quite so simple. You've breached significant magical security, arrived at a protected location through means that shouldn't have been possible, and claimed to be from somewhere our records don't recognize. These are serious concerns that require thorough examination." "We understand. We're willing to answer questions." "How delightful. Let's begin with your so-called goddess." Umbridge turned to Aqua. "You claim divine status." Aqua stood striking a dramatic pose. I am Aqua, goddess of water, guide to wayward souls, and supreme archpriest whose beauty and talent are renowned across multiple planes of existence. My divine nature is self-evident to anyone with the spiritual awareness to recognize true celestial majesty. Umbridge produced a small notepad and began writing. I see. And you can demonstrate these divine powers. Of course. Observe as I channel holy energy that would blind lesser beings with its radiant. That won't be necessary, Umbridge interrupted smoothly. Your claims will be documented and investigated through proper channels. For now, I'll note your assertion of religious authority in my report. She made another note, and Kazuma caught the words, Delusions of Grandeur, written in neat cursive. Aqua's face flushed. Delusions, I am literally a goddess? I've performed miracles. I've resurrected the dead. I've purified entire lakes of corruption. Of course you have, dear. Umbridge's voice dripped condescension. Now regarding the tall one in armor. Darkness, was it? Your name suggests a rather unfortunate alignment. Do you practice dark magic? Darkness stepped forward eagerly. I am Lalatina IV, Dustiness, Crusader, and Defender of the Innocent. Though, if you require verification of my capabilities through rigorous testing, I'm prepared to demonstrate my resistance to various forms of magical assault. I can withstand considerable punishment and would be honored to prove my value through whatever trials you deem appropriate. Umbridge blinked. That's quite all right. Are you certain? I assure you, I can endure far more than you might expect. Binding spells, pain curses, prolonged confinement in harsh conditions. We'll move on, Umbridge said quickly, making notes that probably included requires psychiatric evaluation. She turned to Megumin. And you, child? What is your magical specialty? Megumin straightened, staff held proudly. I am Megumin, Arch-Wizard of the Crimson Demon Clan, master of explosion magic, wielder of the most powerful offensive spell known to civilization. My talents lie in the precise application of overwhelming destructive force, capable of obliterating targets within a half-mile radius, through carefully controlled detonation of compressed magical energy that... So you're a destructive magical practitioner, Umbridge interrupted, her quill scratching rapidly. Unauthorized, unregistered, and apparently trained in combat applications of considerable power. The most considerable power, Megumin corrected. Noted. Umbridge looked at Kazuma. And you're their leader? More like their handler. I see. And what are your magical abilities, Mr. Satu? Kazuma considered his options. Honesty might get them out faster, but honesty also might get them locked up longer. I'm an adventurer. I know basic utility magic theft, prevention, rope binding, trap detection. Nothing dangerous or threatening. How curious. You lead a group containing a self-proclaimed goddess, a crusader, with concerning masochistic tendencies, and a child trained in mass destruction, yet claim only minimal magical talent yourself. I'm very good at delegation. Umbridge's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. How fortunate that you're all so willing to cooperate. It will make the necessary procedures much simpler. What procedures? Kazuma asked, though he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. First, we'll need to verify your identities through proper magical examination. Then we'll conduct memory assessments to ensure your story aligns with reality. We'll also need to evaluate potential security risks, document all magical capabilities, and determine whether you pose any threat to the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. Memory assessments. Standard procedure for unauthorized arrivals. We need to understand exactly how you came to be here and ensure you haven't been exposed to information that could compromise magical society. Kazuma's instincts screamed danger. We'd prefer to avoid having our memories examined without legal representation. Legal representation? Umbridge's laugh was high and girlish and completely devoid of humor. Mr. Satu, you're not suspects. You're simply persons of interest who require processing. The Ministry has authority to conduct these examinations in matters of magical security. It's all perfectly legal and in accordance with Educational Decree Number 28, which grants the High Inquisitor emergency powers during potential crisis situations. This is a crisis. 4 foreign magic users appearing on Hogwarts grounds through means that bypassed our strongest protective enchantments. I'd say that qualifies. McGonagall stepped forward. Dolores, perhaps we should wait for the full Ministry response before taking such dramatic action. The Minister has granted me full authority in this matter, Minerva. Unless you'd like me to include concerns about Hogwarts security protocols in my report. Umbridge's smile sharpened. After all, these individuals did manage to arrive on school grounds despite supposedly impenetrable wards. One might question whether those wards were properly maintained. McGonagall's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Kazuma's mind raced. This woman wasn't interested in helping them. She was building a case, creating leverage, turning their accident into something she could use. He'd seen it before in corrupt guild officials who manufactured crises to justify their authority. We're willing to cooperate, he said carefully, but we'd like assurance that we'll be treated fairly and released once the investigation concludes. Of course, dear boy. I'm simply ensuring proper procedure is followed. Now, if you'll all follow me, we'll begin with the preliminary examinations. Actually, Kazuma said, playing his only card, I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. Umbridge raised an eyebrow. Oh. You need to verify our story and ensure we're not a threat. We need to return home. What if we make a deal? We provide full cooperation, answer questions, demonstrate our magic under controlled conditions, explain everything about the port key. In exchange, you help us get back to Axel and agree not to pursue charges for what was clearly an accident. How pragmatic. Umbridge studied him with the expression of a cat, considering a particularly slow mouse. Though I'm afraid the Ministry doesn't negotiate with potential security threats. Then consider it cooperation in exchange for efficiency. You get your investigation completed quickly and thoroughly. We get to leave. Everyone wins. Umbridge tapped her quill against her notepad. I'll consider your proposal. But first, we'll need those memory examinations. Simply as a good faith gesture, you understand. Kazuma understood perfectly. She was going to examine their memories, document everything, and then use whatever she found as justification for whatever she wanted to do. The deal was a trap wrapped in bureaucratic pleasantries. But they were stuck in a magical school in an unknown world with no way home and no leverage except cooperation. We'll need time to discuss this, Kazuma said. Of course. You have 5 minutes. Umbridge's smile could have frozen wine. I'll be just outside. Do try not to do anything foolish. She swept from the room in a rustle of pink fabric, taking McGonagall and the other faculty with her. The door closed with a soft click. Kazuma waited 3 seconds, then turned to his party. We're in serious trouble. Obviously, Aqua said. That woman is clearly corrupt, power-hungry, and spiritually bankrupt. I can sense the darkness in her aura. For once, we agree on something. Maguman leaned on her staff. Should I prepare to demonstrate my explosion magic on the Toad Woman? A single well-placed detonation would eliminate the primary threat and establish our dominance in this negotiation. No explosions on the bureaucrat. You say that now, but no. Explosions. Darkness looked thoughtful. If they do proceed with these memory examinations, will there be restraints involved? I should prepare myself mentally for the possibility of extended confinement. Kazuma pinched the bridge of his nose. We're not letting them mess with our memories. We need a plan. I could purify the entire castle, Aqua suggested. Cleanse it of corruption and dark magic. That would prove my divine authority and force them to treat us with proper respect. That would also probably destroy half the building and get us arrested for real. Your lack of faith is disappointing. The door opened. Umbridge stood in the threshold, still smiling. Time's up, she said sweetly. Shall we begin? Kazuma looked at his party, a goddess no one believed a wizard, who only knew one spell, a crusader who enjoyed punishment, and himself a cynical adventurer with minimal magic and maximum survival instinct. They were about to have their memories examined by a government official who clearly had her own agenda. This was going to get worse before it got better. He just hoped they'd survive long enough to figure out how. The new room was colder than the first, which Kazuma hadn't thought possible. Stone walls pressed in from all sides. A single chair sat in the center, bolted to the floor and surrounded by runes that glowed faintly blue. The setup screamed Interrogation chamber in every language Kazuma knew, and probably several he didn't. A thin man in dark robes stood beside the chair, wand held loosely in pale fingers. His expression was blank, in the way that meant either extreme professionalism or complete lack of empathy. Probably both. This is Obliviator Crouch, Umbridge said, her voice still carrying that dreadful cheerfulness. He specializes in memory modification for the Ministry. Very thorough, very precise. Memory modification, Kazuma repeated slowly. You mean erasing memories? Adjusting them, dear boy. We simply need to ensure your recollections align with reality and don't contain any inconsistencies that might complicate matters. Kazuma's survival instincts, which had kept him alive through apocalyptic toads and demon generals, were currently engaged in a full-blown panic. I thought you said this was standard procedure. It is. For cases involving potential breaches of the statute of secrecy. We haven't seen anything secret. We've been in custody since we arrived. Nevertheless, the procedure must be followed. Umbridge gestured to the chair. Miss Aqua will go first, as her claims require the most extensive verification. Aqua crossed her arms. I refuse to let some bureaucratic lackey tamper with my divine consciousness. My memories are sacred records of celestial experience spanning eons. One does not simply adjust the mind of a goddess. One does when the goddess is in ministry custody, Umbridge said pleasantly. Mr. Ada Crouch, if she won't cooperate voluntarily, you're authorized to use binding charms. The Obliviator raised his wand. Kazuma stepped between them, and Aqua hands raised. Wait. If this is just verification, why the threats? Why the restraints? He looked at Crouch. What exactly does this procedure involve? The Obliviator's expression didn't change. I will examine the subject's recent memories, verify the accuracy of stated claims, and make minimal adjustments to remove any exposure to magical information that could compromise security. Define minimal. That depends on what I find. And if something goes wrong. For the first time, Crouch showed something resembling emotion, a flicker of annoyance. I've performed hundreds of memory modifications. The procedure is safe when conducted properly. When conducted properly, Kazuma repeated. What happens when it's not conducted properly? Umbridge's smile tightened. Mr. Satu, you're wasting time with unnecessary questions. I'm asking because I've heard stories about memory magic going wrong. People losing more than intended. Permanent damage. I want to know the risks before we agree to anything. The risks are minimal. That's not an answer. The door opened. McGonagall entered, her expression carefully neutral. Dolores, might I have a word? We're in the middle of official ministry business. It concerns the safety protocols for memory modification on unknown magical entities. I believe the headmaster would want proper documentation before proceeding. Umbridge's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. 5 minutes, Minerva. Mr. Crouch, prepare the subject. The two witches stepped outside. The moment the door closed, Kazuma turned to the Obliviator. Tell me the truth. What are the actual risks? Crouch studied him with cold appraisal. Memory charms, when improperly calibrated or applied with excessive force, can cause permanent damage. Confusion, amnesia, personality changes. In extreme cases, complete mental breakdown. And you're planning to use this on all four of us. Those are my orders. Even though we're from somewhere you don't recognize using magic that probably works differently from yours, with memories that might not respond the same way to your spells. Something flickered in Crouch's expression. The procedure will be adjusted for unknown variables. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be accurate. Crouch lowered his wand slightly. I don't enjoy my work, Mr. Satu, but I'm good at it. Your memories will be examined and adjusted as minimally as possible to satisfy ministry requirements. Resist, and I'll be forced to use stronger methods. Cooperate, and this will be over quickly. Aqua grabbed Kazuma's arm. I don't like this. That man's aura is wrong. His magic feels invasive. All memory magic is invasive, Crouch said. That's the nature of the discipline. Megumin leaned heavily on her staff. If you attempt to modify my memories of explosion magic, I will consider it an act of war against the Crimson Demon clan and respond with appropriate force. Your memories of explosion magic are precisely what need to be verified. Then verify them without alteration. I've spent years perfecting my understanding of controlled detonation. Any tampering could disrupt the delicate balance between magical theory and practical application. Darkness stepped forward. I volunteer to go first. If the procedure involves discomfort or potential harm, I should bear that burden to protect my companions. Crouch stared at her. That's not how this works. I insist. My duty as a crusader demands that I shield others from danger, even at cost to myself. Please proceed with whatever invasive magical techniques you deem necessary. Stop volunteering for things, Kazuma muttered. He turned back to Crouch. Look, we're cooperating, but I need to know if you find something in our memories that doesn't match your world's magic, yet what happens? I document it and report to Undersecretary Umbridge. And she decides what gets erased. Correct. The door opened. Umbridge and McGonagall returned, though McGonagall's expression suggested the conversation hadn't gone her way. We'll proceed as planned, Umbridge announced. Miss Aqua first, then the others in turn. Mr. Crouch assures me the process is perfectly safe for cooperative subjects. Aqua looked at Kazuma, genuine fear showing through her usual bravado. I don't want to forget things. What if I forget important divine wisdom? What if I forget my followers? You won't, Kazuma said, though he had no idea if that was true. Just try to stay calm. Stay calm while some government wizard rifles through my sacred memories. That's easy for you to say. I know, but we don't have a choice right now. Aqua walked to the chair with the air of someone approaching an execution. She sat stiffly, hands gripping the armrests. Crouch moved behind her, wand raised. "Focus on your arrival at Hogwarts," he instructed. "Think about the moments before you appeared on the grounds." "I was in Axel. Kazuma bought a cursed goblet from a shady merchant. I tried to warn him it was dangerous, but he never listens to my divine wisdom." "Focus, please." Aqua closed her eyes. Crouch's wand tip touched her temple. Blue light flared and Aqua gasped. Her hands clenched the armrests hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Relax," Crouch said. "Fighting the spell makes it worse. It feels like ice crawling through my brain." "That's normal. Keep breathing." The light intensified. Kazuma watched helplessly as Aqua's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, discomfort, and finally a blank sort of calm that was somehow worse than fear. The spell released. Aqua slumped in the chair, blinking slowly. "How do you feel?" Crouch asked. "Strange, fuzzy, like I've forgotten something but can't remember what." "That will pass. The disorientation is temporary." Aqua stood shakily. Kazuma caught her arm to steady her. "What did he do to you?" "I don't know. I remember the marketplace. I remember the goblet. But there's a gap where something should be. It's like trying to recall a dream after waking up." Umbridge made a note. "Interesting. The subject's divine claims appear to be delusions, as suspected. No evidence of actual celestial origin in her memories." "That's because you erased them." Aqua's voice cracked. "I know I'm a goddess. I know I've performed miracles. But when I try to remember specific instances, there's just nothing. Confirmation bias and false memory construction are common in individuals with grandiose delusions," Umbridge said clinically. "Mr. Crouch, proceed with the next subject." Kazuma's turn came faster than he wanted. He sat in the chair, feeling the runes activate beneath him. Crouch's expression hadn't changed, but his wand hand was steady. "Same instructions. Focus on your arrival at Hogwarts. And if I refuse, you won't. The chair is enchanted to ensure cooperation." Kazuma felt the magic tighten around him, gentle but inexorable. His muscles relaxed against his will. His thoughts became easier to focus, harder to hide. "The marketplace," Crouch prompted. "The merchant. The goblet." Images surfaced in Kazuma's mind. The merchant's too wide smile. The goblet's warm metal. The symbols glowing gold. He tried to hold on to the details. The merchant's face, the exact words spoken, the stall's location. But they slipped away like water through his fingers. The ice sensation Aqua had described hit him like a hammer. Cold intelligence probed through his recent memories, examining, cataloging, and then carefully, deliberately removing specific pieces. The merchant's face blurred. The stall's location vanished. Even the symbols on the goblet faded to vague impressions. When Crouch released the spell, Kazuma gasped. His head pounded. There was a hole in his memory where something important should have been. "What did you take?" he demanded. "Information that could compromise ongoing ministry investigations into illegal portkey trafficking," Crouch said. "You'll remember purchasing the artifact, but not from whom or where. The gap will fill in naturally over the next few hours. That's not minimal adjustment. That's targeted erasure. That's my job." Megumin went next. She sat in the chair with her staff across her lap, glaring at Crouch with barely contained fury. The spell hit her harder. She'd been tensed against it, fighting the magic. When it released, she looked disoriented and angry. "I still remember explosion magic," she said immediately. "Every formula, every incantation, every theory of controlled detonation." "Your technical knowledge remains intact," Crouch confirmed, "though you've been placed under a binding agreement not to demonstrate it while on Hogwarts grounds. You'll find attempting to cast will trigger severe magical backlash." "You cursed me. I restricted you. There's a difference." Darkness's examination was mercifully brief. Whatever Crouch saw in her memories apparently didn't require modification. She stood from the chair looking disappointed. "That was surprisingly painless," she said. "I expected far more invasive procedures." "Be grateful," Crouch said flatly. Umbridge surveyed them with satisfaction. "There, that wasn't so terrible, was it? And now we have verified accounts that can be properly documented. You're all free to return to your holding area while the Ministry processes your case." Kazuma's head still throbbed. Aqua leaned against the wall, still trying to fill in gaps in her memory. Megumin gripped her staff like she wanted to use it as a weapon. Only Darkness seemed unaffected, which was typical. They'd been examined, modified, and documented. Their memories had been rifled through by a government employee with a wand and no accountability. And they were still trapped in a magical school with no way home and a bureaucrat who clearly had plans for them. "How long will processing take?" Kazuma asked. Umbridge's smile could have frozen summer. "As long as necessary, Mr. Satu. These things take time." She swept from the room, leaving them with guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Kazuma touched his temple, trying to remember the merchant's face. Nothing came. Just a blank space where important information used to be. They'd cooperated. They'd followed the rules. And they'd lost something they couldn't get back. The only question now was how much more they'd lose before this was over. The holding room had one advantage over the interrogation chamber. It had a window. Kazuma stood by the narrow opening, watching rain streak down ancient glass while his brain tried to patch the holes in his memory. Every time he reached for details about the merchant, he got nothing. Just smooth emptiness where facts should have been. Behind him, Aqua sat cross-legged on the floor, muttering prayers that were supposed to restore divine clarity, but mostly just made her more frustrated. Megumin had claimed a corner and was writing furiously in a small notebook, documenting everything she could remember about explosion theory before the binding curse made her forget. Darkness stood by the door, listening to the guards outside and looking disappointed that they weren't discussing torture techniques. Kazuma's headache had faded to a dull throb. The disorientation was passing, replaced by cold anger. They'd been probed, modified, and filed away like paperwork. Umbridge had what she wanted: documented proof that they were confused foreigners with delusions of grandeur and dangerous magical abilities. Perfect ammunition for whatever political game she was playing. The door opened. Instead of Umbridge's pink monstrosity, a young man in ministry robes entered carrying a stack of documents. He looked harried, overworked, and scared of being caught doing something he shouldn't. "Delivery for processing," he announced to the guards, too loud. Then quieter. "I'm supposed to verify inventory against the incident report." Kazuma's luck stat tingled. He moved closer, trying to look cooperative and harmless. "What kind of inventory?" "Personal effects confiscated upon arrival." "Standard procedure." The clerk set his stack down and began sorting through papers. "Let's see. One goblet origin, unknown, suspected port key modification. One staff, magical focus, potentially dangerous. Various clothing items, 2 swords, 1 set of armor." "Boy." "That's everything we had when we arrived," Kazuma said. When do we get it back? After the investigation concludes and the items are cleared for return. The clerk pulled out a specific form, frowned at it, and muttered something about incorrect filing codes. Kazuma caught a glimpse of the header Department of Magical Transportation Port Key Office. Below that, in smaller text, Transfer Authorization Department of Mysteries Unspeakable Division. His mind clicked into gear. That form, it's about the goblet. The clerk jumped slightly. I'm not authorized to discuss. I'm not asking you to discuss anything. I'm just asking if that's the artifact's documentation. Yes, but... And it mentions the Department of Mysteries? The clerk's face went pale. You shouldn't have seen that. But I did. Which means the goblet wasn't just some random market trinket. It came from somewhere official. Kazuma kept his voice calm, reasonable. Look, we're the ones who got dragged here by that thing. We deserve to know what we're dealing with. I can't. Regulations prohibit. Please. Kazuma let exhaustion show in his voice. It wasn't hard. We've had our memories modified. We've been threatened with imprisonment. We just want to understand why this happened to us. The clerk glanced at the door. The guards outside were talking amongst themselves, paying no attention. He lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. The goblet was part of a research project. Department of Mysteries studies strange phenomena, time, space, thought, death. They experiment with things most wizards don't understand. Sometimes those experiments get misplaced. Misplaced, Kazuma repeated. You're telling me we got yanked across dimensions because someone in your government lost track of an experimental port key? I didn't say that. But it's true. The clerk's silence was answer enough. Kazuma's thoughts raced. An experimental port key from a department that studied dimensional magic would explain why it had broken through Hogwarts' defenses. It would also explain why Umbridge was so interested. This wasn't just a security breach. This was evidence of government incompetence that could embarrass the ministry. What was the experiment supposed to do? Kazuma asked. I don't know. The unspeakables don't share details. But the paperwork mentions something about destination anchoring and spatial resonance. The clerk shuffled his documents nervously. Look, I've already said too much. If anyone finds out I showed you classified information, I won't tell anyone. I just need to know one more thing. Kazuma kept his voice steady. Is the goblet still active? Could it pull other port keys off course? The clerk hesitated, then nodded slightly. The report says it's generating a localized disruption field. Any port key activated within a certain radius would be drawn toward it instead of reaching the intended destination. That's probably why you ended up at Hogwarts. The goblet was confiscated and brought here for analysis, and when you activated it, the connection pulled you to where it was being held instead of wherever the merchant programmed it to go. Kazuma felt pieces clicking together. So as long as that goblet is here, we can't use a port key to leave. Any attempt to transport out would just pull us back. Theoretically, yes. Though I'm not sure why you'd want to activate another port key after what happened with the first one. Because it's the only way home. The clerk's expression shifted to something like pity. Then you're stuck. Ministry protocol requires the goblet to remain in secure storage until the investigation is complete. That could take months, maybe years. Unless someone destroys it. Destroying ministry property is a serious crime. What if it's destroyed accidentally during an authorized examination? The clerk stared at him. That would require accessing the storage facility, bypassing security wards, and causing enough damage to neutralize the artifact without triggering alarms or harming yourself. Even if you could do all that, you'd need authorization to be anywhere near restricted areas. Hypothetically, how would someone get that authorization? They wouldn't. Not without high-level clearance or assistance from someone with proper credentials. The clerk gathered his papers quickly. I've already risked too much. Forget we had this conversation. He hurried out, leaving Kazuma with more information than he'd had 5 minutes ago and a plan forming in the back of his mind. Aqua appeared beside him. You're scheming. I can tell by the look on your face. What did that nervous bureaucrat tell you? The goblet isn't just cursed. It's an experimental artifact that's creating a field that pulls portkeys toward it. As long as it exists, we can't use portkey magic to get home. Then we destroy it. That's ministry property in a secure facility. We'd need access authorization and a way to neutralize it without getting caught. Megumin closed her notebook and stood. I can destroy it. One explosion precisely targeted. The artifact would be reduced to component molecules. You're under a binding curse. You cast explosion magic here and it backlashes on you. A temporary inconvenience. A potentially fatal inconvenience. Darkness joined them, armor clanking softly. If we're planning to infiltrate a restricted facility, I should take point. My defensive capabilities would allow me to absorb any traps or security measures protecting the rest of you from harm. We're not infiltrating anything yet, Kazuma said. We need more information first. Layout of the storage facility, guard rotations, exactly where the goblet is being held. And how do we get that information? Aqua asked. We asked nicely. You think they'll just tell us? No, but I think we can find someone who has access to that information and convince them to help us. The door opened again. This time it was a different official, older with a tired expression of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with ministry politics. You're the foreign arrivals, she said. Not a question. That's us, Kazuma confirmed. I'm here to inform you that your case has been escalated to the minister's office. Undersecretary Umbridge has recommended extended detention, pending further investigation into potential security threats. Kazuma's stomach dropped. How extended? Indefinite. You'll be transferred to holding facilities within the ministry proper while your status is determined. We haven't done anything wrong. We're victims of a malfunctioning artifact. Nevertheless, the recommendation stands. The official consulted her clipboard. Unless you have information relevant to the investigation that might expedite processing. Cooperation is always viewed favorably by the minister. Kazuma caught the slight emphasis on information. This wasn't just bureaucratic procedure. This was an offer. What kind of information? Anything relating to how you acquired the artifact, who might have supplied it, and whether there are others with access to similar devices. The ministry is very interested in tracking down illegal portkey trafficking operations. We can't tell you what we don't remember. Your obliviator made sure of that. The official's expression didn't change. Unfortunate. Though if any memories were to return, or if you were to recall useful details, that would certainly help your case. She was fishing. Umbridge wanted more ammunition, more documentation of a crisis she could use to justify her authority. And this official was offering a trade information for freedom. Kazuma made a decision. I might remember something, he said carefully, about the merchant who sold us the goblet, and the area where we purchased it. But my memory is still foggy from the modification. How convenient that it might clear up. What would you need to help that process along? Access to our confiscated items. Sometimes seeing familiar objects can trigger memory recovery. The official studied him. That would require authorization to enter the storage facility. I understand. But if it helps the investigation, I'll make a note in your file. Whether it's approved is up to the undersecretary. The official turned to leave, then paused. Word of advice, Dolores Umbridge doesn't like being played. If you're planning something clever, make sure it's very clever. She's ended careers for less. The door closed. Aqua grabbed Kazuma's arm. Please tell me you're not actually going to cooperate with that awful woman. I'm not cooperating. I'm negotiating access. To do what? We still don't have a plan for destroying the goblet. We don't need to destroy it ourselves. We just need to get close enough to understand how it works. Then we can figure out if there's another way to counter its effects. Megumin tapped her staff thoughtfully. The clerk mentioned spatial resonance. If the goblet is acting as an anchor point, disrupting that resonance might be sufficient to allow portkey travel without destroying the artifact itself. Can you disrupt resonance without explosion magic? Theoretically, though it would require precise magical manipulation and intimate knowledge of the artifact's construction, which we'd get by examining it up close. Precisely. Darkness looked thoughtful. This plan involves entering a restricted area under false pretenses, manipulating ministry officials, and potentially sabotaging government property. It's dangerous, legally questionable, and could result in severe punishment if discovered. That's accurate, Kazuma confirmed. I approve wholeheartedly. When do we begin? As soon as Umbridge grants access. Which she will, because she thinks we're going to give her information she can use against us. And instead we're going to find a way to break that goblet's hold on portkey magic, get ourselves home, and leave this bureaucratic nightmare behind us. Aqua shook her head. This is going to go wrong. I can feel it. Everything you plan always goes wrong. Usually, Kazuma admitted. But sometimes it goes wrong in useful ways. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. Rain continued to fall outside the window. Somewhere in this massive castle, a piece of experimental magic was keeping them trapped. Somewhere in the ministry, officials were deciding their fate based on political convenience rather than justice. Kazuma had been in worse situations. Not many, but a few. The difference was that this time he had a plan. Not a good plan, not even a particularly safe plan. But it was a plan that might get them home. And right now, that was enough. The door would open again. Umbridge would send for them. They'd be escorted to the storage facility under guard. And when that happened, Kazuma would be ready. He touched his temple where the memory gaps still ached. The Obliviator had taken information from him. The ministry had tried to make them helpless. They were about to learn that Kazuma Satu was most dangerous when he had nothing left to lose. The approval came faster than Kazuma expected, which immediately made him suspicious. Umbridge's assistant delivered the news personally. They would be escorted to the ministry storage facility the following morning for a supervised examination of their confiscated items. The phrasing was careful, the tone professional, but Kazuma could read between the lines. This wasn't a favor. This was Umbridge setting up her next move. She's going to use this against us, Aqua said after the assistant left. Whatever we do in that facility, she'll twist it into evidence of something sinister. Probably, Kazuma agreed, which is why we need to be very careful about what we actually do. They spent the evening planning in whispers, crouched in the corner of their holding room where the guards couldn't easily hear. Kazuma sketched a rough map, based on what little information they'd gathered from overheard conversations and careless comments from ministry personnel. The storage facility was 3 floors below the main entrance. Access required authorization and was monitored by both human guards and magical wards. Security was tight, but not impossible. The real trick would be moving through the ministry without attracting attention. 4 obvious foreigners in adventuring gear would stand out like aqua at a humility convention. "We need to look like we belong," Kazuma said. "Act like we're supposed to be there. Confidence is half of any successful infiltration." "I am supremely confident," Aqua declared. "I walk with the assured grace of divine authority." "You walk like you're about to demand to speak to someone's manager. That's what divine authority looks like." Megumin studied Kazuma's crude map. "The facility connects to the Flu network. I overheard 2 guards discussing it earlier. Apparently, ministry employees use the fireplaces for rapid transit between departments." Kazuma's mind caught on that detail. Flu network. That's the fireplace travel system. According to the guards, yes. You step into a fireplace, throw powder, speak your destination clearly, and the flames carry you there. "Speak clearly," Kazuma repeated. "What happens if you don't speak clearly?" "I assume you end up somewhere you didn't intend." Kazuma filed that information away. The Flu network was monitored. The clerk had mentioned something about ministry oversight, but it was also commonplace. Hundreds of employees probably used it daily. If they could access it, they might be able to move through the building without escort. The problem was getting initial access, and not ending up in a fireplace on the other side of the country because someone mumbled. "Tomorrow," Kazuma said, "we cooperate fully. We let them escort us to the storage facility. We examine our items under supervision, and while we're there, we pay very close attention to everything around us. Guard positions, ward locations, emergency exits, Flu access points." "And then?" Darkness asked. "Then we improvise based on what we learn." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the best plan we've got with the information we have. Once we see the actual layout, we can make better decisions." Aqua groaned. "This is going to be a disaster. I can already feel it." "Your optimism is inspiring," Kazuma said dryly. The Ministry of Magic was exactly as bureaucratic as Kazuma had feared. Gray stone corridors, polished floors, windows that looked out on London streets but were somehow positioned underground. Magic made everything simultaneously more impressive and more confusing. Their escort consisted of 4 guards in dark robes, all carrying wands and expressions that suggested they'd rather be doing literally anything else. Umbridge herself had not deigned to appear, instead sending a junior official with instructions to document everything and report back. The junior official was young, nervous, and clearly terrified of making a mistake. His name was something like Perkins or Parkins, and he clutched his clipboard like it was the only thing keeping him from drowning in ministry protocol. "This way," Perkins said, leading them down a staircase that seemed to spiral forever. "The storage facility is in sub-level 3. All confiscated items are cataloged and secured according to their threat level. Yours have been classified as level 4, potentially dangerous, but containable." "What's level 5? Kazuma asked. "Things we don't talk about." They passed other ministry employees going about their business, witches and wizards in various robes carrying files, packages, and in one case, a cage containing something that hissed at them in what might have been parcel tongue. Nobody paid them much attention, just another group being escorted through the building. Nothing unusual. Kazuma noted every detail. The corridors branched at regular intervals. Fireplaces were positioned at major intersections, their flames burning green and ready for travel. Signs pointed toward different departments, with names that ranged from mundane to ominous. Magical accidents and catastrophes. Improper use of magic office. Department of Mysteries. The flu network, Kazuma said casually. Can anyone use it? Ministry employees with proper clearance, Perkins said, without looking up from his clipboard. Unauthorized use is a serious violation. Why? Just curious. We don't have anything like it back home. How primitive. They reached sub-level 3. The corridor here was dimmer, colder. Fewer people, more wards. Kazuma could feel the magic pressing against his skin like static electricity. The guards grew more alert, hands drifting toward wands. Perkins stopped at a heavy door marked Confiscated Materials Restricted Access. He tapped his wand against a rune-covered plate. The door swung open with a groan of ancient hinges. The storage facility was larger than Kazuma expected. Rows of shelves stretched into dimness, each one holding items wrapped in cloth or sealed in containers. Some glowed faintly. Others seemed to absorb light. Everything was labeled with tags that probably meant something to ministry employees, but looked like gibberish to him. Your items are in Section J, Perkins said, consulting his clipboard. This way. They walked between shelves stacked with confiscated contraband. Kazuma caught glimpses of other artifacts, mirrors that showed no reflection. Books that whispered a painting that definitely just tried to make eye contact with him. This was where the ministry stored things it didn't want in public circulation. Dangerous things. Illegal things. Things that probably shouldn't exist. Their belongings were laid out on a metal table near the back of the facility. The goblet sat in the center, still tarnished, but now surrounded by a shimmering containment field. Megumin's staff leaned against the wall, similarly warded. Their swords armor and various pouches were arranged with bureaucratic precision. You have 15 minutes to examine your items, Perkins announced. Do not touch anything without permission. Do not attempt to remove anything from the facility. Guards will remain present at all times. Kazuma approached the table slowly. The goblet drew his attention immediately. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. The symbols weren't just decorative. They formed patterned circuits of magical energy that pulsed faintly even through the containment field. It's still active, Megumin observed, moving beside him. The spatial resonance is generating a continuous field. I can feel it disrupting the ambient magic. Yes. Can you tell how it works? Not completely. But the principle is similar to certain teleportation magics I've studied. It's creating a gravitational effect on similar spells, pulling them toward itself, rather than allowing them to reach their intended destination. And to stop it, you'd need to either destroy the artifact or disrupt the resonance pattern. Destroying it would be simple: apply sufficient force to shatter the physical container. But disrupting the resonance... Megumin tilted her head, studying the patterns. That would require interfering with the magical circuits, introducing a counter-frequency or overloading specific nodes. In terms I can understand, break it or break its magic. Either works, but breaking the magic is more complicated. Aqua had moved to examine her own confiscated items, mostly religious symbols and purification tools that the ministry had probably classified as potentially dangerous cult paraphernalia. She picked up a small vial of blessed water, and Kazuma noticed one of the guards tense. I'm not doing anything, Aqua said quickly. Just looking. The guard relaxed slightly but kept his wand trained on her. Darkness was examining her armor with the expression of someone reuniting with a beloved friend. They cleaned it, she said, sounding almost disappointed. I was hoping they'd leave the battle damage intact as evidence of glorious combat. There was no glorious combat, Kazuma muttered. We got yanked here by accident. The intent matters less than the result. Kazuma turned his attention to the broader facility. The containment field around the goblet was strong, but localized, it didn't extend to the surrounding area. The wards on the walls and doors were more comprehensive, designed to prevent unauthorized removal of items. But between the shelves, he spotted something interesting. A fireplace, dark, unused, but unmistakably connected to the flue network, based on the green tinge of ash in its grate. Mr. Perkins, Kazuma said, keeping his voice casual. That fireplace, is it functional? Perkins glanced over. Yes, but it's restricted to authorized personnel. Why? Just wondering about safety protocols. You know, in case of emergency. In case of emergency, there are designated evacuation routes. The flue is not one of them. But it was accessible. That was the important detail. Kazuma's mind raced through possibilities. They couldn't just grab the goblet and run. The wards would stop them, and the guards would intervene. But if they could create a distraction, something that required the guards' attention elsewhere. He looked at Aqua, who was still examining her confiscated items with divine indignation. At Megumin, who was studying magical resonance patterns with the focus of someone planning something explosive. At Darkness, who was practically vibrating with excitement at being in a restricted facility. An idea formed. Not a good idea, but possibly a functional one. Aqua, Kazuma said quietly, moving closer. How much noise could you make if you tried to purify something in here? She blinked. What kind of noise? Loud, dramatic. The kind that would get everyone's attention. I could make quite a spectacle. Though actually purifying anything would take time and proper preparation. I don't need you to actually purify anything. I just need you to convince everyone you're trying. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want a distraction? Exactly. Megumin, could you disable the containment field around the goblet if you had 30 seconds without supervision? Possibly. Though without my staff and the binding curse preventing major spell work, it would be difficult. Difficult or impossible. Difficult. That's good enough. Darkness. I volunteer to draw the guards' attention, she said immediately. I can position myself near the entrance and create a compelling reason for them to focus on me instead of the rest of you. By doing what? I have several ideas, all of which involve putting myself in potentially dangerous situations that would require immediate intervention. Of course you do. Kazuma took a breath. They had 15 minutes in this facility, 4 guards watching them. One nervous bureaucrat who probably just wanted to finish his paperwork and go home. And one experimental artifact that was keeping them trapped in this world. It wasn't much of an opportunity, but it might be the only one they'd get. Here's what we're going to do, Kazuma said, voice barely above a whisper. Aqua, you're going to notice something wrong with one of your blessed items. Something that needs immediate purification before it becomes corrupted. Make it loud. Make it urgent. Make it sound like a genuine crisis. I can do that. Megumin, while everyone's distracted, you get close to the goblet. You don't need to destroy it, just study the resonance pattern closely enough that you can figure out how to disrupt it later. Understood? Darkness, you're our backup plan. If something goes wrong, you create enough chaos that we can use the flue network to get out of here. Where would we go? Anywhere that's not here. We figure out the rest later. Perkins checked his pocket watch. 10 minutes remaining. Kazuma nodded to Aqua. She took a deep breath, stepped toward her confiscated items, and picked up a small religious icon. Her eyes widened in perfectly performed horror. "No," she gasped. "No, this can't be." The nearest guard tensed. "What's wrong?" "This sacred symbol has been exposed to dark magic. I can feel corruption seeping into its blessed structure. If it's not purified immediately, it could trigger a cascading spiritual contamination that would spread to everything in this facility." "Put it down," the guard ordered. "I can't. The corruption is already bonding to my divine energy. I need to perform an emergency purification right now, or the backlash could..." Blue light flared from the icon. Aqua hadn't actually done anything. She'd just channeled a tiny bit of magic to make it glow dramatically. But it was enough. All 4 guards converged on her position, wands raised. Perkins stumbled backward, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "Nobody move," one guard shouted. Kazuma moved. Not toward Aqua, but sideways, positioning himself where the guards couldn't easily see him. Megman did the same, circling toward the table with the goblet. "I'm trying to help." Aqua continued, her voice rising to a pitch that probably violated noise ordinances in multiple countries. "This corruption could spread to the entire ministry. Someone find me purification salt and holy water immediately." "We don't have holy water." "Then we're all doomed." Megumi reached the table. Her hands moved quickly, tracing patterns in the air above the goblet. The containment field flickered. She wasn't trying to break it, just studying how it responded to magical interference. Darkness, meanwhile, had wandered toward a shelf containing something that pulsed with ominous red light. She reached for it experimentally. A different guard shouted, "Don't touch that." "Why not?" Darkness asked innocently. "Is it dangerous? Extremely? How dangerous? Possibly fatal?" Her smile could have lit up the room. Fascinating. Now 3 guards were watching Darkness. One was still focused on Aqua, who had begun what sounded like a prayer, but was probably just her making up dramatic-sounding words on the spot. Kazuma edged toward the fireplace. It was dark, cold, but definitely connected. A small container of flu powder sat on the mantel, standard ministry issue for employees who needed rapid transit. He grabbed a handful. Megumin finished her examination and caught his eye. She nodded slightly. She'd learned what she needed. Time to leave. "Aqua," Kazuma called. "Drop it." She released the icon immediately. The glow faded. The guards converged, checking the item for actual corruption and finding nothing. "False alarm," one muttered. "It's perfectly fine." "I was certain I sensed something," Aqua said, managing to sound both apologetic and offended. "My divine senses are usually infallible." Perkins pushed through the guard's, face flushed. "That's quite enough. Examination time is over. Everyone back to..." Kazuma threw the flu powder into the fireplace. Green flames roared to life. "What are you doing?" Perkins shrieked. "Leaving," Kazuma said. He grabbed Aqua's arm. "Everyone, fireplace now. You can't use the flu without authorization. Watch me." Megumin dove into the flames, first shouting something that sounded like Ministry Atrium. The fire swallowed her, and she vanished. Darkness followed, looking thrilled by the chaos. Guards rushed toward them, wands raised. Spells flashed past Kazuma's head, stunning hexes, binding charms. Things that probably would have hurt quite a bit. He pulled Aqua into the fireplace. The green flames felt warm and strange and completely unnatural. "Atrium," he shouted, or tried to. The word came out garbled because Aqua was flailing and screaming about divine dignity. The world spun. The storage facility vanished in a rush of green light and heat, and the sensation of being pulled through a tube made of fire and poor life decisions. They tumbled out of a different fireplace into a massive chamber filled with wizards in official robes, all of whom turned to stare at the two foreigners who'd just crashed their extremely important Monday morning. Kazuma lay on polished marble coughing soot. Aqua sprawled beside him, hair disheveled and covered in ash. Somewhere behind them, Megumin was explaining to a very confused ministry employee that they were authorized visitors who'd gotten lost. Darkness was dusting off her armor and looking disappointed that they hadn't been caught yet. And in Sub-Level 3, alarms were definitely ringing. "Did we just escape ministry custody using government transportation?" Aqua asked. "Technically, yes," Kazuma confirmed. "That seems illegal. Probably very illegal." "Good." Aqua stood brushing ash from her clothes. "I was getting tired of following their stupid rules anyway." Kazuma pulled himself to his feet. They were in the ministry atrium, a grand entrance hall with fireplaces lining the walls and a fountain in the center. Dozens of employees were staring at them. Some were reaching for wands. They had maybe 30 seconds before security arrived. "Run," Kazuma suggested. "Run," Aqua agreed. They ran. Behind them, the ministry erupted into chaos. Ahead of them, freedom beckoned. And in Kazuma's pocket, scribbled on a piece of parchment he'd stolen from Perkins' clipboard when no one was looking, were detailed notes about the goblet's resonance pattern and exactly how to disrupt it. Phase 1 of the escape plan complete. Phase 2, don't get caught. Phase 3, they'd figure that out when they got there. The ministry atrium emptied faster than Kazuma had ever seen a crowd disperse. One moment there were dozens of bureaucrats going about their morning routines. The next there were stampeding wizards fleeing the 4 foreigners who'd just crashed through the Flu network without authorization. Alarms shrieked from every direction. Red light pulsed from runes embedded in the walls. Somewhere overhead, a magical voice announced that security protocols were being enacted, and all personnel should proceed to designated safe areas in an orderly fashion. Nobody was proceeding in an orderly fashion. "This way!" Kazuma shouted over the chaos, grabbing Aqua's arm and pulling her toward what he hoped was an exit. The atrium was massive, with corridors branching in every direction. He picked one at random and ran. Behind them, guards poured from the elevators. Spells flashed past red sparks, purple bindings, something that sizzled against the marble floor and left scorch marks. Kazuma ducked, weaved, and kept running. His lack of heavy armor meant he was faster than Darkness, who clanked along behind them like a one-woman percussion section. "We need to get back to Hogwarts," Megumin said, keeping pace beside him, despite her small stature. "The goblet is still there. We can't disrupt its resonance from here." "I know, I'm working on it." "Work faster. I count at least 15 security personnel converging on our position." Kazuma risked a glance back. She wasn't exaggerating. Ministry employees in official robes were flooding the corridor, wands raised, and expressions suggesting they were done being understanding about foreign visitors who broke their laws. A stunning spell caught Darkness square in the chest. She stumbled her armor, absorbing most of the impact, but the force still knocked her into the wall. "Keep going," she called out, already recovering. "I'll hold them here. We're not leaving you behind. I insist. This is what I trained for, providing rearguard action while my companions escape to safety." Another volley of spells hammered into her position. Darkness raised her shield, deflecting most of them, and actually smiled. Kazuma made a split-second decision. "Aqua, can you slow them down without hurting anyone? I can make things extremely unpleasant for them." "Do it." Aqua spun, raising her hands. Water erupted from nowhere, flooding the corridor behind them in a knee-high wave that sent ministry employees sprawling. It wasn't an attack just enough to create chaos and buy them seconds. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a dead end. Not a corridor, not an exit. Just a solid wall covered in official ministry notices about proper wand registration and workplace safety protocols. Wonderful, Kazuma muttered. Any ideas? Megumin studied the wall, then the ceiling, then pulled out the notes Kazuma had stolen. According to the facility layout, we're directly above the storage area. If we could breach the floor... No explosions, remember. You're still under that binding curse. I'm aware. Which is why I'm suggesting you do something creative instead. Footsteps pounded toward them. Darkness appeared backing around the corner while deflecting spells with her shield. Her armor was scorched and dented, but her expression was euphoric. They're quite persistent, she reported. And their spell accuracy is improving. I may not be able to hold them much longer, which would be terrible for all of you, but rather exciting for me personally. Kazuma pressed his hands against the wall, searching for any weakness. His fingers found a crack in the stonework barely visible. He focused his magic, trying to remember every utility spell he'd ever learned. Steel, he muttered, targeting not an object, but the structural integrity of the damaged stone. It was stupid. It shouldn't work. Steel was for taking items, not abstract concepts. But the wall groaned. Cracks spread from the point he touched, spiderwebbing outward. Magic in this world operated differently than back home. Maybe different enough that his abilities could interact in unexpected ways. Everyone back, he said. Aqua hit the weakened section with a burst of divine energy. The wall didn't explode, it simply stopped being structurally sound. Stone crumbled inward, revealing darkness below. Down, Kazuma shouted. They dropped through the breach, landing hard on the storage facility floor 1 level below. Kazuma's knees screamed in protest. Aqua yelped as she hit the ground. Megumin managed a controlled fall that somehow looked graceful. Darkness crashed through her armor, taking the impact and probably enjoying it. They were in sub-level 3. The storage facility stretched around them, dimly lit and filled with confiscated magic. And somewhere in here was the goblet that had started this entire mess. Above them, guards were already organizing. Kazuma could hear orders being shouted, spells being prepared for a coordinated assault. Find the goblet, he told Megumin. You've got maybe 2 minutes. She was already moving, following the path they'd taken during their supervised visit. Kazuma pulled out the last handful of flu powder from his pocket, enough for maybe one more jump if they needed an escape route. Aqua grabbed his shoulder. Kazuma, I'm sensing something wrong. There's organized magic converging on this location. Multiple casters working in concert. How many? At least a dozen, maybe more. They're preparing something big. That wasn't good. Kazuma's danger sense was screaming now, louder than it had since the time Aqua had accidentally attracted every undead in a 20-mile radius. Megumin found the goblet still on its table, still surrounded by its containment field. She pulled out the stolen notes, cross-referencing the resonance patterns she'd observed earlier. I need to disrupt 3 specific nodes simultaneously, she said, her hands moving in precise patterns around the artifact. The binding curse prevents offensive magic, but this is technically just magical interference. It might work. Might. 65% confidence. That's not reassuring. It's better than our usual odds. She had a point. The ceiling above them shuddered. Plaster dust rained down. Through the breach, Kazuma could see magical light gathering, multiple wands pointed downward, energy building towards something catastrophic. Then Umbridge's voice echoed through the facility, magically amplified and dripping with false sweetness. Mr. Satu, I'm disappointed. We offered you cooperation, we followed proper procedure, and this is how you repay ministry hospitality. Kazuma cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back. You modified our memories without consent, threatened us with indefinite detention, and used us as a political prop. All perfectly legal under current ministry regulations. What you're doing, however, is quite illegal. Destruction of government property, unauthorized use of the flu network, resisting lawful custody. The list goes on. Add it to our tab? I intend to. But first, I'm going to ensure you can't cause any more disruption to proper ministry operations. The magical energy above them reached critical mass. Kazuma recognized the buildup. He'd seen enough combat magic to know when someone was preparing something devastating. Megumin, how long? 30 seconds. Maybe less if I skip the safety checks. Skip them. That could cause feedback that damages the surrounding area. Better than being buried under ministry property. Darkness moved to stand beneath the breach shield raised. I'll intercept the initial assault. My defensive capabilities should provide adequate protection for several seconds. The spell came down like a hammer made of pure force. But it wasn't an attack spell. It was a barrier. Translucent energy spread across the ceiling, flowing down the walls, encasing the entire storage facility in a dome of magical protection. Protego Maxima. Kazuma recognized it from overheard conversations during their detention. A high-level shielding charm designed to contain magical threats and prevent collateral damage. They weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to trap them. They've sealed us in, Aqua said, touching the barrier. Her hand sparked against its surface. This is powerful magic. Multiple casters maintaining it simultaneously. I could try to purify it, but that would take time we don't have. Megumin's hands moved faster, magic flowing from her fingertips into the goblet's containment field. The resonance pattern flickered. One node disrupted, then another. Almost there, she muttered. Just one more. The barrier compressed inward, shrinking the available space. Kazuma felt pressure building in his ears. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. Umbridge's voice filtered through the shield. This is your final opportunity to surrender peacefully. The barrier will continue to contract until you have no choice but to comply. Kazuma looked at his party. Aqua was trying to counter the barrier with divine magic and failing. Darkness was pressing against it, with her shield testing its strength. Megumin was seconds away from disrupting the goblet, but running out of time. He made a decision that would either save them or get them all killed. Megumin, he said quietly. Use explosion. She looked up, startled. The binding curse. I know. But you studied the goblet's resonance pattern. You know how magical energy flows through it. If you cast explosion at the exact moment you disrupt the final node, the feedback might channel through the goblet instead of backlashing on you. Might? That's theoretical at best. Do you have a better idea? She considered for exactly 2 seconds. No? Then do it. Aim for the goblet. Maximum precision, minimal spread. Don't try to blow up the whole facility, just the artifact. Megumin's expression shifted from uncertainty to determination. She planted her staff, began the incantation she'd perfected over countless uses, and channeled every bit of magical talent she possessed into one focused point. The barrier continued shrinking. 20 feet of clearance, 15, 10. Darkness the compression, Kazuma said. When Megumin casts, the explosion is going to hit that barrier. Can you position yourself to absorb the reflected shockwave? Her eyes lit up. You want me to serve as a living buffer between the blast and our party? Exactly. That will be excruciatingly painful. I know. I accept enthusiastically. Megumin's chant reached its crescendo. Her staff glowed crimson. The binding curse tried to interfere, wrapping around her magic like chains. But she'd timed it perfectly. Her disruption of the third resonance node happened in the same instant she released explosion. The goblet shattered. The explosion that followed wasn't the usual city-leveling detonation. The dimensional clash between Konosuba magic and Harry Potter wards compressed the blast, focused it, turned it from a catastrophic eruption into a concentrated lance of destructive energy. It hit the Protego Maxima barrier from inside. The shield held. Barely. The dozen wizards maintaining it above poured more magic into reinforcement. But the explosion's force had to go somewhere. It reflected inward, bouncing back toward the party in a wave of heat and pressure. Darkness stepped into its path. The shockwave hit her like a physical object. Her armor rang like a bell. She was thrown backward, crashed into a shelf full of confiscated items, and lay there smoking slightly. But she'd absorbed enough of the blast that the rest of the party only got knocked down instead of obliterated. Kazuma's ears rang. His vision swam. Everything hurt in ways that suggested he'd probably regret this tomorrow. But the goblet was destroyed. Where it had sat on the table, there was now just a scorch mark and fragments of tarnished metal scattered across scorched wood. The containment field was gone. The resonance pattern that had trapped them was disrupted beyond repair. Megumin collapsed, the binding curse backlashing despite her careful planning. She'd burned through her magic for the day and possibly the next, but she was alive. The Protego Maxima barrier flickered, destabilized by the internal explosion. The wizards maintaining it struggled to compensate for the feedback. Kazuma grabbed the flue powder, stumbled to the nearest fireplace, and threw the emerald dust into cold ashes. Green flames roared to life. Everyone up. We're leaving. Aqua dragged Megumin to her feet. Darkness pulled herself from the wreckage of the shelf, grinning despite obvious pain. They tumbled into the fireplace as the barrier collapsed and ministry guards flooded the storage facility. Hogwarts! Kazuma shouted, pronunciation clear this time, because he absolutely could not afford to end up in the wrong place. The flue network grabbed them, pulled them through space and magical connection. The ministry vanished in a rush of green flame and desperate escape. They crashed out of a fireplace at Hogwarts, tumbling onto the floor of what looked like a professor's office. An elderly wizard with a magnificent beard looked up from his desk, expression shifting from mild curiosity to resigned concern. "Ah," he said. "You must be the unauthorized arrivals Dolores has been so concerned about." Kazuma recognized him from overheard conversations. Dumbledore, the headmaster. "We need a port key out of here," Kazuma said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Immediately, before the ministry shows up with arrest warrants." Dumbledore studied them over half-moon spectacles. "You've destroyed the anchor artifact." "How did you?" "I can feel the magical disruption. The resonance field that was preventing port key travel has collapsed." He opened a drawer, pulled out what looked like an old boot. "This will take you to the coordinates last programmed into your original port key. I assume that's your intended destination." "Yes, please." "Then I suggest you hurry. Dolores will arrive shortly, and while I find her educational decrees tiresome, she does have authority to pursue fugitives from ministry custody." He held out the boot. Kazuma grabbed it, gestured for his party to touch it. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Because you destroyed an artifact that was causing considerable disruption to our protective wards. You've given Dolores a headache that will occupy her attention for weeks, and frankly, I appreciate anyone who causes that much chaos in the Ministry's orderly filing systems. Also, you seem to mean well despite the property damage. The boot glowed. Portkey magic activated, no longer disrupted by the goblet's interference. One last thing, Dumbledore said as the spell began pulling them away. If you ever do return to our world, I'd suggest using more conventional transportation methods. Noted, Kazuma said. The portkey yanked them through space. Hogwarts vanished. The Ministry Umbridge, the bureaucratic nightmare, all of it collapsed into distance and displacement. They tumbled out onto familiar ground. Axel, the marketplace. Late afternoon sun instead of British rain. Kazuma lay on dusty cobblestones staring at the sky and laughed. They'd escaped. Somehow, impossibly, they'd actually escaped. Megumin groaned beside him. I feel like I've been trampled by an angry dragon. That's the binding curse backlash, Aqua said. Also possibly the explosion feedback. And definitely the flu travel. That transportation method is deeply unpleasant. Darkness sat up, checking her armor for damage. That was magnificent. Being crushed by a barrier, absorbing an explosion, fleeing through magical fire all in one afternoon. I couldn't have asked for a better conclusion. Kazuma pulled himself to his feet, helping the others up. They were battered, exhausted, and had definitely violated enough laws to warrant multiple arrest warrants in a different dimension. But they were home. The goblet was destroyed. The Ministry was someone else's problem. Umbridge would have to find different foreigners to use for her political maneuvering. Let's never do that again, Kazuma said. Agreed, Aqua said. Absolutely, Megumin added. Though it was rather exciting, Darkness said. They limped toward the guild hall, 4 adventurers who'd survived something that probably should have killed them. Just another day in Axel. Just another disaster narrowly avoided. Just another story they'd eventually tell over drinks, embellishing the details until it sounded almost heroic. Behind them, the marketplace continued its usual chaos. Ahead of them, normal life waited. And in Kazuma's pocket, a few grains of flu powder remained as a souvenir. He'd deal with that later. Right now, he just wanted food rest and approximately 3 days without anyone pointing magical weapons at him. Was that too much to ask? Probably. But he'd earned it anyway. Axel had never looked so good. The familiar dusty streets, the crooked buildings, the guild hall that smelled like cheap beer and cheaper adventurers. It was all perfectly wonderfully mundane. No bureaucrats, no memory modification, no pink-clad officials with political agendas and educational decrees. Kazuma sat in the guild hall, nursing a drink and trying not to think about the fact that they'd technically escaped ministry custody, destroyed government property, and probably violated about 17 different magical laws in the process. The return trip through the disrupted port key had been just as unpleasant as the initial journey, but at least they'd ended up in the right dimension. I still say we should have taken more souvenirs, Aqua complained from across the table. We were in a magical castle full of interesting artifacts. A goddess deserves compensation for the indignities she suffered. We barely escaped with our lives, Kazuma pointed out. And we did take souvenirs. He pulled out a small pouch from his pack. Inside was a handful of flu powder he had snagged from the ministry atrium during their chaotic escape. Emerald dust glittered in the afternoon light. Megumin leaned forward, eyes gleaming with interest. The fireplace transportation substance. I've been considering its applications. If we could replicate the formula, we might create a localized teleportation network for quick retreats after I cast Explosion. We're not creating a teleportation network. You have no vision. I have plenty of vision. Most of it involves not getting arrested again. Darkness set down her drink with a satisfied sigh. I must admit the entire ordeal was rather exhilarating. Being detained, interrogated, having our memories modified, it was all quite intense. Though I was hoping for more physical restraints during the interrogation process. Of course you were. The Obliviator was surprisingly gentle. I expected something more invasive. Kazuma decided not to pursue that line of conversation. His head still ached occasionally where the memory gaps were slowly filling in with vague impressions rather than actual details. Some things were probably lost forever. He'd accepted that. What mattered was that they were home. The Ministry could file all the incident reports they wanted. Umbridge could rage about escaped foreign criminals. The whole mess was someone else's problem now. Aqua grabbed the pouch of flu powder, examining it with divine curiosity. This is quite fascinating. The magical signature is completely different from our world's transportation magic. It's almost like it's keyed to specific locations rather than coordinates. It is keyed to locations. You speak the destination name and the fire takes you there. How primitive. What if you mispronounce the name? Then you probably end up somewhere you didn't intend. Aqua's eyes lit up with the kind of mischief that Kazuma had learned to dread. We should test it. Absolutely not. But Kazuma, think of the possibilities. We could establish a connection between here and somewhere useful. Somewhere with better amenities. Somewhere that doesn't smell like defeat and questionable hygiene. The flu network only connects to locations in that world. We're in a completely different dimension now. It won't work. You don't know that for certain. I know enough not to experiment with interdimensional fireplace travel in the middle of a populated guild hall. Aqua stood clutching the pouch. Fine. Then I'll test it somewhere private, for science. For science, Kazuma repeated flatly. And divine curiosity. She swept toward the door with theatrical flair. Kazuma sighed and followed because leaving Aqua unsupervised with magical powder was asking for disaster. Megumin and Darkness trailed behind, both looking intrigued by the possibility of chaos. They ended up in the small courtyard behind the guild hall, where a fireplace sat unused, except for the occasional cooking fire. Aqua marched up to it with the confidence of someone who'd never met a magical artifact she couldn't misuse. Stand back, she commanded. I'm about to demonstrate divine mastery over interdimensional transportation magic. You're about to waste perfectly good flu powder, Kazuma muttered. Aqua threw a handful of powder into the fireplace. Green flames erupted with a whoosh that sent several nearby adventurers scrambling backward. The fire crackled and swirled, looking exactly like it had in the Ministry Emerald, and inviting, and probably dangerous. Now I speak the destination clearly, Aqua said, stepping toward the flames. I choose the royal palace. Surely a goddess deserves accommodations befitting her divine status. Wait, she stepped into the fire. Royal pal. She coughed. Smoke got in her mouth. The word came out garbled, more like royalpa. And then she vanished with a shriek. The flames died. Silence fell over the courtyard. Did she just teleport to the royal palace? Megumin asked. No, Kazuma said slowly. She definitely did not teleport to the royal palace. How do you know? because she coughed in the middle of the destination name. Which means she probably ended up somewhere that sounds vaguely similar, but is absolutely not the royal palace. Darkness looked concerned. Should we attempt to retrieve her? We don't even know where she went. A distant explosion of indignant shrieking echoed from somewhere in the city. Then silence. Then more shrieking, followed by what sounded like farm animals. I think she's fine, Kazuma said. 10 minutes later, Aqua returned covered in straw and smelling distinctly of livestock. Her hair was matted with something that might have been mud or might have been worse. Her divine dignity was in tatters. I ended up in a barn, she announced, voice shaking with barely contained fury. A barn full of pigs. Common, mundane, non-magical pigs. Did you say royal palace or pig barn? Kazuma asked, fighting back a smile. I said royal palace. The stupid powder misheard me. The powder doesn't hear anything. You coughed in the middle of the word and mispronounced the destination. That's exactly what I said would happen. You could have warned me more clearly. I tried to stop you. You didn't listen. Aqua hurled the pouch of flu powder at him. He caught it, tucking it safely back into his pack. That was enough experimentation with interdimensional travel for one day, possibly for the rest of his life. Megumin tapped her staff thoughtfully. If the powder responds to phonetic similarity, we could potentially abuse that mechanic. Mispronounce destinations intentionally to access locations that aren't officially connected to the network. We're not abusing anything, Kazuma said firmly. We're keeping this powder as a historical curiosity and never using it again. Your lack of experimental spirit is disappointing. My experimental spirit is the reason we just spent 3 days in magical government custody. Darkness smiled. Those were 3 quite memorable days. Memorable is one word for them. They walked back to the guild hall, leaving the fireplace to smolder peacefully. Aqua muttered prayers about divine justice and improper magical transportation. Megumin drafted notes about potential explosion delivery systems using modified flu mechanics. Darkness looked wistful about the whole ordeal. Kazuma just felt tired. The goblet was destroyed. The ministry was probably still trying to figure out how 4 foreign adventurers had managed to cause so much chaos in such a short time. Umbridge was undoubtedly filing reports that would haunt some bureaucrats' nightmares for years. But they were home. They were safe. And most importantly, they were someone else's problem now. Inside the guild hall, someone was already spreading rumors about their mysterious disappearance and sudden return. By tomorrow, there'd be stories about them traveling to distant realms and fighting magical beasts. By next week, Megumin would probably be claiming she'd blown up an entire castle. Kazuma decided not to correct any of it. Let them have their stories. He knew the truth. They'd stumbled into a bureaucratic nightmare, survived through a combination of luck and strategic chaos, and escaped with nothing to show for it except some magical powder and memories that were only partially intact. It was, in other words, a perfectly normal adventure for their party. Next time, Aqua declared, settling back at their table, I'm vetting all transportation artifacts before purchase. There won't be a next time, Kazuma said. We're done with experimental magic. You say that now. I mean it. You always say you mean it. Then something happens, and we end up in another ridiculous situation. Kazuma couldn't argue with that. His life was a series of ridiculous situations interrupted by brief moments of normalcy and financial instability. He pulled out the stolen notes about the goblet's resonance pattern, the ones he'd snagged from Perkins' clipboard. Megumin had already copied everything useful. The rest was just magical theory he didn't fully understand. He tossed the parchment into the fireplace across the room. It caught fire, normal orange, non-magical fire, and turned to ash. Evidence destroyed. Connections severed. They were officially done with the Ministry of Magic Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and anything involving unauthorized portkeys. Aqua raised her drink. To surviving bureaucracy. Megumin raised hers. To explosions, narrowly avoided. Darkness raised hers. To experiences that tested our resolve. Kazuma raised his drink. To being home. They drank. Outside, Axel continued its usual chaos. Adventures waited. Quests beckoned. Rent was still due. But for now, they were just 4 adventurers in a guild hall, celebrating their return from a place they'd never intended to visit and would definitely never mention again. At least not until someone asked where they'd been for 3 days. Then Megumin would start talking about castles and explosions, Aqua would claim, divine persecution, and Darkness would mention something that made everyone uncomfortable. And Kazuma would just shake his head and order another drink. Because that was life with this party. Ridiculous, chaotic, occasionally traumatic, but never ever boring. The flu powder sat in his pack, emerald dust, glittering with unused potential. He'd sell it eventually, maybe to a collector, maybe to someone who appreciated historical curiosities from other dimensions. Or maybe he'd keep it just as a reminder. Not all treasure was gold. Sometimes it was just proof that you'd survived something completely absurd and lived to complain about it. And in Kazuma's experience, that was the most valuable souvenir of all. In the weeks following the incident, the Ministry of Magic quietly closed its investigation into the foreign arrivals. The official report cited, "Dimensional anomaly resolved through collaborative effort," and buried most of the embarrassing details in classified archives. Umbridge spent months trying to explain how 4 untrained adventurers had escaped ministry custody, destroyed government property, and exposed security vulnerabilities in both Hogwarts and the Department of Mysteries. The Unspeakables were forced to review their artifact containment protocols. 3 employees received formal reprimands for losing track of experimental portkeys. The resonance anchor's destruction actually improved Hogwarts' protective wards, though McGonagall would never admit that to Umbridge. Most significantly, the incident prompted new educational decrees requiring proper documentation before memory modification. An ironic legacy that would have amused Kazuma had he known about it. In Axel, the party never spoke of their interdimensional adventure again. Some stories were better left as cautionary tales about cheap transportation artifacts and overzealous bureaucrats. The flu powder remained in Kazuma's pack, unused and gathering dust. A souvenir of the time they accidentally improved magical security in another world while running for their lives.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.